We have dependencies everywhere. Europe has dependencies all over the place, across the board.
The Brussels bubble is an echo chamber, and no matter where you look, nobody talks to the outside world.
Even hardcore Eurosceptics nowadays realize that they need some sort of a European cooperation in order to promote and protect their national interests.
I just want to start with emphasizing why this podcast has to be relevant for people outside of the Brussels bubble. The Brussels bubble is an echo chamber, and no matter where you look, nobody talks to the outside world. That's my problem with the Brussels bubble. And
they try to speak to the outside world, but either the outside world is not interested or they're not very effective in doing that.
And another thing is, and this is, I think, the main message here, that people outside of the Brussels bubble, so the citizens of Europe, are not really interested in following what's happening in Brussels.
I would have to slightly disagree with you, because I believe that the people are getting more and more interested. It's not a dramatic change, but incrementally, they are realizing that Brussels is affecting their everyday lives. That's one. And the second is they understand the challenges of the current international system and the fact that we are somehow being squeezed between the United States and China, the big superpowers, and the member states by themselves. I believe they absolutely feel that they cannot stand on their own, and that we need some kind of a platform, common European platform, in order to be able to stand on our own and compete either with the United States or China, but also with other middle powers like Russia and Turkey. And if you look at the problems themselves, the challenges themselves, they are, too big to handle by one member state.
But why people are interested more in EU and Brussels? Because of the populists. They are presenting the Brussels institutions as the main enemy. That's why Europe is becoming popular in the news across European countries.
That's the other side of the same coin. People understand that Europe is significant for their everyday lives and that we need some sort of a common European platform in order to compete, basically in order to survive in the modern world. We know that. We've heard it like 1,000 times, the rise of Eurosceptic populism all over Europe. Basically identifying a problem with what we could agree to some extent with that. What we have now is not entirely effective if we want to be safe, if we want to be growing economically, if we want to keep up to maintain our social welfare system. What we have now is not very effective, and we need to change it. And there's been a very subtle but extremely important shift also in the political messaging of the far right, the Eurosceptic populist right, to be more broad, in the sense that not even they think that we need to destroy the common institutions, but they need to change it as well, according to their own image and according to their own principles and values, obviously. But even hardcore Eurosceptics nowadays realize that they need some sort of a European cooperation in order to promote and protect their national interests.
Do you think that pro-European parties, so the EPP or the Liberals, did they already realize that it's okay to criticize Europe and the way it works? Because for a long time, those who actually want Europe to be strong were afraid to criticize it because that would mean that they don't believe in the project.
It was framed like this because it was a political strategy for the past 10, 15 years or so. It was always, you have to vote for us because there's going to be a disaster if you vote either for the far right, according to their perception, or to the far left. And this worked to some extent, but it created very specific political frames. If you criticize the EU, then you are a Eurosceptic and you're not with us.
Demar Buda, a Polish MEP, has used an initiative of the Danish presidency to bring forward the child control to zero regulation, which is still debated. And Poland is actually opposing, along with, I think, the Netherlands and some other countries. So not all the countries convinced this is the right way to approach the problem, which is common in the EU. We're a group of 27 countries that sometimes agree, sometimes not. Now, what is the Polish MEP communicating to his followers, to his voters? That the EU is trying to impose something. The EU, which he's a part of, he's part of the parliament debating that, but he's framing the EU as some external power that he's fighting against.
But that's part of the regular democratic process, is it not? Anyone can frame this the way they want, and in the end, everyone can compete for the votes of the people. So the literature, the academic literature concerning populism, I don't believe that it is settled yet whether this is like a normal democratic phenomenon or whether this is like a pathological state of democracy. So I'm not sure how to respond to this. They are free to say what they want. They are free to portray Europe as an external force that is trying to steal away the sovereignty of the member states. But I believe that this is going to be a very outdated message very, very soon. Because as I said, there is possibly for the first time, common European interest emerging. Well, let me correct myself, not for the first time, because there was a common European interest immediately after the Second World War, and that was to rebuild the continent and to create common structures for managing conflict, peaceful common structures for managing conflict that has been ravaging the continent for centuries, millennia. And now we are again in front of such an emerging realization that there is a common interest. Only this time, it's not immediately after war. It is because we have reached a new arrangement in the international system. The rules are changing, the dynamics are changing, the polarity of the system is changing. And as I said in the beginning, Europe finds itself in a sort of a geopolitical isolation. There is intense competition from Russia, from China, from Turkey, from African states, and of course, even from the United States. And therefore, I think that these multiple external shocks are causing us to look inward for some unity. And this is, again, the optimistic way to look at things. The other narrative, though, that of being effective in actually managing the challenges, the problems, the threats of the current circumstances, the current geopolitical circumstances, that is, I think it's valid. That is fair game.
Well, I just hope that people across Europe realize that they should not accept politicians who get elected, take the quite significant salaries for being an MEP, and the only thing they do is complain about how bad Europe is. Because 70-80% of national laws are now based on European laws. And unless a country will leave the European Union, well, then what other choice does it have than to just focus on how making Europe better? It sounds quite obvious, but I think politicians are still not standing up to the right standard of why they are, not all, but many.
Well, you said it. 60-70% of the legislation comes from Brussels, and that's been going on for several years now. Okay, this only makes the responsibility that we have here in Brussels even bigger. Creates, first of all, makes the people realize that Brussels is affecting their everyday life, and because of the that we're experiencing, the different challenges, the different threats, it also creates expectations, and it's absolutely normal. If you legislate in Brussels, then it better be good. I don't think that is anything negative to say about the EU. To give a very concrete example, during the COVID crisis, people were genuinely expecting the EU to step in, negotiate for vaccines and other equipment and material that was necessary to deal with the virus and so on. Perception that there are things to be done on the European level to support the people, to support the member states. That is a good thing. There will always be some sort of a political force, whether it is tiny or small or medium, that they're going to be critical about everything. They're going to be saying no to everything, right? And again, this is part of the democratic process. This is part of the game. We have to live with this. It's healthy. I know it's counterintuitive, but having multiple voices, political forces that compete with each other, it's a healthy thing. If you think about it, speaking about effectiveness, which is again a valid point, if 60 and 70%, as you said, of the legislation comes from Brussels, then the responsibility is even bigger, and people are expecting the legislation to be improving the conditions of their life. So if you're criticizing towards that point of view, you're also pragmatic, realistic about it. We have challenges, we have threats, we cannot deal with them by ourselves. We come to Europe to create a platform, to create an alliance, a big alliance that will solve our existential problems. There's nothing weird about this. And it's not some sort of a dark greater force that is beyond our control. It's absolutely practical on a very human level. If you have to negotiate with China, or you have to negotiate with the United States, or you have to manage a very aggressive neighbor as Turkey, of course you will look for allies. It's absolutely natural.
Well, the good thing that I see is that with all the data analysis, with all the technology that is getting cheaper and simpler, is that it will be more and more difficult for politicians to just fool their voters into thinking that they're actually doing something when they're just, communicating propaganda. So I really hope that with this accountability possibilities that we start to see, the political process will just become more effective. What do you think? Is that something that is realistic, or am I delusional?
It's like this with every kind of technology. Technology is always a double-edged sword. You can use the current information communication technology to spread disinformation, misinformation, lies, deep fakes, and so on. Or you can use it to reach out to people and communicate data and facts in a way that was never possible in the past. So yeah, now we have tools at our disposal, for example, to check every single governmental pledge that's been made during the election period, and I then put it on a nice interface online, and then have dozens of experts or academics or independent researchers and so on to check and monitor and track the level of implementation of these governmental pledges. So you have a full picture at the end. And most of them, or many of these governmental promises, are quantifiable. Like if someone says, okay, we're going to raise the average salary by 5 or 8 or 10%, you can actually count this and communicate this to people. And everyone can find this information real time, immediately, with a few clicks. So that can introduce a new era of political accountability, for sure. We have to be actively looking for the truth out there, which the truth is never, something that you can pick up, something tangible. But the quest for search, the search for truth, that quest is very, very real. We have to be consciously on that search every time we can.
So let's talk about this accountability, because one of the big topics of September has been the Mario Draghi report, which for the last year has been, I think, I'm not exaggerating saying if this was the blueprint of the work of the Commission, or you can call it the Bible of the strategy of the European Commission. because Europe needs to become more competitive. Well, what we as Epic think tank showed in our recently published report of the Draghi Observatory is that the emperor is actually not so very well dressed, let's say, because over the year only 11% of the recommendations of the Draghi report have been implemented. Most are actually at the very, very early stage of being discussed. Well, it shows that, well, the urgency that we really need is only in the words. There is no real urgency. Why do you think that is? We're really facing a threat. Even remembering Green Deal, Fit for 55, I remember how much urgency there was back then. The feeling was that everyone should get on board and let's make Europe green. Let's make Europe ready for the green transition. But right now, I think the threat we are facing is way more significant.
Krzysztof, you frame it very conveniently for our discussion. The previous period was the previous 5 years, but this goes further back. The previous 10, 15 years has been the period of the Green Deal. That was the governmental program of the European Union. It was promised, it was advertised, and it was heavily implemented with huge legislative packages, like it was called Fit for 55, for example, that affected every single industry across Europe. So in reality, the Green Deal was a governmental program of a complete transformation, a complete industrial transformation, a complete societal transformation, and economic transformation of the whole continent. That was a stated purpose. Everybody who voted for the Green Deal or supported or advocated in favor of the Green Deal was participating in this perception that we have to change the whole industry to become 100% sustainable and so on. There were reasons for this. I don't want to go into those reasons right now, but what I can say is that it was a conscious choice with Europe as a whole, and I'm including this here, the Commission, but also the European Parliament, with the collaboration of the national parliaments. They are part of the legislative process, and of course the European Council. Don't forget, we should not forget that nothing happens without the leaders of the states and governments, giving their green light. So it's not just the Commission, like some sort of external bureaucracy. It's also the Council, the leaders of.
This is a very, very important point, because people really believe when they follow national news and they see politicians who sit either in the European Parliament or in the national parliament talking, or in the government, national government, talking about Ursula von der Leyen and her initiatives as it would be some sort of external power trying to force something on the rest of Europe. Whereas in reality, the law in Europe is made by three powers: the European Parliament, the European Commission, and a combined forum of the European governments.
Yeah. So it's not just the Commission, it's also elected politicians, and it's also leaders of states and governments. They all collaborated, colluded to make very conscious choices that resulted in the Green Deal and the attempted transformation of the society, the industry, and the economy of Europe. Okay? The Draghi report is another governmental program, but one that has a different focus. And as far as I'm concerned, it brings back a lot of balance that was necessary and much needed in the debate how to structure our industry, how to structure our economy, how to look at the tension, because there's always going to be tension in political decisions, how to look at the tension between sustainability on the one hand and competitiveness on the other, between the environment or protecting the environment and our industry, the industrial society that we necessarily live in. there is always a tension. There's always an attempt to find some balance. For the past 15 years, we didn't have any balance. It was all our focus, our efforts, everything was on sustainability, environmental legislation, protecting the environment at the expense of our competitiveness, our manufacturing capabilities, our industry, and so on and so forth. Draghi, in his report, he identifies that we are, because of our conscious choices in the past and because of the world is changing around us, we are in a very tight spot. And therefore, very soon there will be nothing to sustain. Because we all agree, everybody, who is there to disagree that we have to have a sustainable society, that we have to respect our environment, that we have to, make sure that whatever we produce now can be produced also from our children and our children's children and so on. Everybody agrees on that. But finding the right balance between the two, that's the difficult part. And I think that, the report came to bring back this balanced view between the tensions, and also to recreate a whole governmental program that is not so much focused on sustainability, but also on competitiveness, without having the two of those two, without having those two conflicting with each other, because they can be compatible.
So one thing that I really don't understand, if we all agree that this is an existential threat, it's an urgent issue to deal with, and even the Commission accepts a document that puts it in specific recommendations, why does it take so much time to push this forward? Because, of course, pushing a law, making something law in the EU takes time, usually sometimes 5 to 7 years. That's the regular process. But during COVID, also because of the Russian war in Ukraine, we learned that if the Commission wants something done faster, it can. So we know that things can happen faster. So I really don't understand why this time it's so difficult. Maybe we're not seeing something, but I think that there is really something missing here.
It is good to emphasize that everybody should understand the challenges of, reshifting the focus suddenly inside a bureaucratic organization, which is not accustomed to these sudden dramatic changes. In our member states, in our own democracies, whenever we expect that, whenever there's a change in government and it has very different ideal focuses and different policies, then the whole mechanism adapts and adjusts to implement these changes. That's not something that has been happening a lot in the past on the European level. As I said, it's not a fully functioning political system yet. And therefore, the challenges here are even greater. And they are even greater for institutional structural reasons. For example, we have, and we mentioned that before, we have the Commission, which is the executive branch and has the initiative, but we have two co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council. Of course, we have 27 commissioners from different countries. So it's not one country, one nation. We have 23 different languages in the Parliament. We have the Council not formally meeting every few weeks or months. So it's the system is not meant to be implementing sudden dramatic changes. And of course, you have vested interests. The bureaucracy are prevailing ideas in all bureaucracies that cannot change from one moment to the next. It's absolutely understandable and normal. That is extremely necessary and important for the civil society and the whole system of stakeholders to maintain the pressure. That is true for every nation. That is true for every member state. That is also true for the European level. We have to look at it as our duty for the promises that the Commission is making, that they are kept as civil society, as people, as voters, as active citizens, as people who are active in political parties and processes, for those that are active in those processes. So it's like adding an additional democratic layer on top of everything else that we have. And that is, for all these reasons, more difficult, especially if it's not yet fully functional system. But we're getting there, again, not because someone had a great idea and there was a revelation in their mind, but because it is absolutely necessary. And therefore, as you said, it's an existential issue. That's on the first page of the Draghi report. It's an existential issue, and it is pushing everyone. It is creating the need for the change to happen. But we're happy to support it. And the 11% that you mentioned before, is what EPIC did was to put a number in what everyone was thinking. That 11% is just the missing element of the story, because everyone knew it is urgent, it is existential. We're not doing enough, or we're not doing it fast enough. We have to keep up the pressure. And then EPIC comes to put a number to this story, and also a number to what Draghi is saying. And therefore, everyone now refers to the 11% implementation, which is basically the result of the Draghi Observatory that we created and the implementation index.
Let's talk about another thing that was on top of the news in the last days, still actually is, and that's the EU-US trade negotiations. Depending on which side of the political debate you are, some criticize Ursula von der Leyen for not being tough enough. Some say she negotiated a very bad deal. I hardly find voices who are happy with what has been negotiated. Do you think it was at all possible to get a good deal with Donald Trump at this moment in the US, in the transatlantic relations? Because I don't think so. I don't think we're in a state or a position to even think about a good deal with the US.
Because we are not strong enough. We are very dependent. And we have dependencies everywhere. It's not just the United States that we're dependent on. Europe has dependencies all over the place, across the board. We are dependent on China, for example, for many, many things. Trade, manufacturing, critical raw materials. We are slightly less now, but still quite dependent on energy from Russia. Some member states more than others, but still, we are dependent on third countries like Turkey, for example, or Libya for managing the migration flows that are unprecedented. We are dependent on the United States for our critical digital infrastructure. Therefore, it would be totally unrealistic to expect that there was going to be an intensification of the rivalry between the United States and Europe. We have to be pragmatic about it. So I'm not saying that I'm happy with the result. What I'm saying is, okay, let's learn our lesson from what happened, become stronger, less dependent on others, and therefore more able to have our own position and being able to support it and to promote it and to protect it.
For me, the biggest lesson here is that the only way Europe can compete in this economy of giants is as one community. And it actually doesn't matter if we talk about a federalized Europe that will be one organism in the future, or we talk about a more fragmented Europe of more sovereign states, as some political powers would want it, but still acting together, because right now only giants dictate the rules of the game. China, US, India, and Europe is just not strong enough in this. Europe is, but nation states like Poland, even Germany or France, the most powerful countries, they're not equal partners for those giants. And I think this is the main lesson here, that we are either together or we're just someone else's dish on someone else's plate.
And there are different configurations that we can think of to manage or to rethink the decision-making mechanism and processes on a European level. It's not like someone has the complete recipe for creating a union that works in favor of the people and in favor of the member states, supporting local authorities, supporting regional authorities, supporting national authorities and policies. It's a work in progress, and there are different ideas. As a matter of fact, what we have right now is not working good enough. As far as I'm concerned, it's not working good enough. We have to reinvent Europe. In the end, we have to reinvent Europe. And the tragedy, if you want, is that right now we have a political establishment, mainstream parties, that are unable to implement changes in an effective, efficient way. And then, on the other hand, you have these contenders, the challengers, that are coming with some ideas that belong to the 19th and the 20th century. So they're not offering solutions either. And I believe that the solutions will come from some other kind of constellation of political forces across the Union, across Europe, across the continent in the end. But definitely we need something else. We should not be afraid of speaking about treaty changes, for example. We should not be afraid of speaking about a new constitution. We should not be even afraid of speaking about reinventing Europe as such, the European Union as such. It's been reinvented several times in the past. It was first imagined as a community that manages coal and steel. Then it became European Economic Community. Then it became European Communities. Then it became the European Union. So it's part of our heritage to evolve the way that we manage the collective decision-making processes in the continent. It's not a bad thing, but we need to have courage to do that. We need to have creativity. We need to have imagination, if you wish. But there are productive forces and there are dormant political forces across Europe, across the continent, that could actually contribute towards that goal.
Wait. I think you very smoothly started the second segment of our podcast, which brings us to discussing the shape of Europe, because you spoke only about the most recent reinventing of Europe, but if you look back to the even earlier years of the European history, there has been so many different ideas of what Europe is, where it ends. If you would have asked Catherine the Great, Alaska would be part of Europe, as it was part of Russia at some point, and Russia was, or is, according to some, also part of Europe. So let's maybe go to the second part of the podcast now and talk about the different angles of how Europe has been seen over centuries. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to transition in the second segment, because, as I told you before, what we want to do with this podcast is also to give a perspective, not to talk about the current challenges, the current threats, the current political developments, but also to situate that, or to provide a frame, a perspective of looking at this from a historical point of view, because I believe that there is a lot of answers to be found, or patterns at least. If not answers, then to identify some patterns in European history that affect the problems that we face today with fragmentation, for example. There's a constant tension between
how should we approach
unity.
this? How should we approach this second part? Should we talk about specific patterns across hundreds of years? Should we focus on specific dates on the timeline? How do you think it's most efficient to show people how Europe has evolved and where we are now and why we are here?
Well, the first thing that I would talk about is the actual shape of Europe, the geography of the continent, because analysts sometimes tend to forget one of the most fundamental aspects of politics, which is the space on which the politics takes place. Space is
the land.
Yeah, the geography of the continent is fundamental in explaining even some of the aspects of our modern political life, like, as I said, fragmentation. Fragmentation is usually perceived as a product of different cultures, different languages, different national contexts, and so on. But even before the different cultural, linguistic, and political and national contexts, we have a continent that is geographically fragmented. And it's in many respects, and I will probably repeat this now and in the future podcast, in many respects, European integration is a constant battle against the land itself. It's a constant battle, a fight. It's a constant fight against the land itself, the continent.
What do you mean by that? Because sounds very interesting, but I'm not sure I'm getting the comparison.
Okay, so in order to understand what I'm saying, we have to make a more general comparison between the United States, China, and Europe. The geography of these two regions, the United States and China, has been fundamental in enabling the level of integration that you see now, to have a centralized state or a federal state that is controlling a very large geographical space. That is true both for the United States and also for China. So geography is not irrelevant. And for example, for the United States, you have the Mississippi River and the basin that it creates and all the tributaries that enabled the integration of the United States into a federal state. Goes way back in time, but is absolutely true. It's American Geopolitics 101. It is widely available online as well. The fact that there were such a huge river that goes from north to south, and it connects the two extremities of North America, and it creates a very fertile basin with all its tributaries. And it creates a very intricate network of transportation, very cheap transportation, both of goods and of people and the military and so on. That was a major factor in actually integrating the whole North American continent into the United States, into a federal state. At the same time, as I said, the Great Plains, it provided the bread house, very concentrated. Again, it needed concentrated management as well. The same thing happened in China with the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. Those were two huge rivers that were actually connected at some point in history with a man-made connection. But again, it created an interconnected network of highways, basically, for cheap transportation, for collective management of farmland. So the central government, let's say the central political entity, the central polity, emerged because it was necessary to manage the farmland, which was concentrated and dependent on two big rivers and so on. Now,
Europe doesn't have that. I can see where you're going with that.
Where the argument goes.
Mountains, we have waters, we have the Baltic Sea, we have the Mediterranean Sea, we have, even today, Europe is not well connected. When you look on how Spain and Portugal are not part of the train grid, not part of the electricity grid as much as they could.
Exactly. So we don't have these mighty river system in Europe, like Mississippi, the Yangtze, and the Yellow rivers in China, Mississippi in the United States. We have 5 or 6 river systems, all flowing to different seas and different directions. Each one pulled trade, culture, power in this or that direction, but the continent's lifelines in terms of fresh water and transportation systems became also its lines of division. Also, mountains, the ranges, the mountain range that we have. The Alps, they're not just snow-covered peaks for postcards. They are also walls. And for centuries, they kept Italians apart from Germans and Spaniards, or Spaniards apart from French. So these ridges, these are mountain ranges, didn't just shape they shaped the cultural context, they shaped the national context, they shaped the borders, if you look at it, and ultimately they enable widespread fragmentation, disunity, if you want.
Yes, but also if you look at the Eastern Europe, you will see that there is a big bunch of flatland going almost into Moscow, and in the north you have the Baltic Sea, which also is a big dividing shape of the European continent. So it's really uniquely diverse.
Well, it is. The North Plain, if you think about it, goes from all the way from France to Russia, all the way from France to Moscow until the Urals mountains. But in our case, in Europe's case, this was also a fault line for mass migration and invasion. So we were not blessed with having the Pacific Ocean on the one side and the Atlantic Ocean on the other side. In our case, the peninsula that we call Europe, basically, is just the end line of Eurasian movements, Eurasian mass migration flows, and Eurasian invasions, historically speaking, but even today, right? It's the same pattern again. China was in a similar situation, and what did they do? They built the Great Wall centuries ago, if not 1,000 years. I don't remember exactly when it was built, right? We were not blessed by geography in many respects, and especially when it comes to the features, the geographical features that would enable integration instead of fragmentation. So the argument that I'm making here is that what we now consider cultural and national and linguistic diversity is not only a matter of conscious choice, it is also a matter of geography. It is a matter of the mountain ranges that separate us. It is the absence of the rivers, of a mighty, huge river system that would help integrate the people, the different cities, and also necessitate the emergence of a central political entity that would manage the river system. It's the absence of one great plain that is safe from external invasions or other kind of flows, migratory flows. And so that is a very big contrast between United States, China, and Europe. There are, meaningful differentiations, and we can talk about this for hours and hours, but the main contrast is this, that North America, the United States, were blessed with a geography that enabled their integration. The same thing in China, that also took very conscious, necessary steps to ensure that integration would overcome such geographical barriers. But here in Europe, we are also celebrating the fact that there is a lot of fragmentation. It's part of our cultural and national heritage. But this doesn't change the fact, and I'm not against it, obviously, but this doesn't change the fact that European integration, since very early, has been a fight against the geographical features of the continent itself.
Which also made it impossible to integrate across Europe culturally and language-wise, because of course we have a common Christian heritage across the continent, but apart from that, Europe couldn't be more different. There's not much that the citizens of Estonia have in common with the citizens of Portugal. Different language, different customs, different food, even Christmas is celebrated differently across Europe. So this brings me to the point that we have to look for our strength and unity somewhere else. This unity has to be built on diversity. We cannot take the US or China as a benchmark in this regard.
We can take lessons from them. There are ways of overcoming the geographical limitations, for sure. Technology is one of them. The traditional notions of space and time have been totally, or to a great extent, changed fundamentally in the previous 30, 40 years because of information and communication technology. So geographical limitations are not insurmountable. That's one thing that we can say here. And the other thing is that, again, I'm not saying that the cultural diversity that we see is something negative as such. What I'm saying is that we have to understand where it comes from and manage it. So there is a way of turning this into a positive feature of the European culture, of the European civilization, which leads me to the third thing that I would like to say here as a reaction to your comment, and that is that despite all the differences, we do have also many commonalities. We do share a European civilization, and one that is totally worthy of protection. We have to cherish that as well, despite the different languages, despite the different national contexts, our different historical trajectories into modernity and so on, despite all this, we're still Europeans. And you can see it when you go abroad, for example. It's far more easier to spot the common things that the things that we have in common when the moment you step out of Europe, wherever you go, the United States or in Australia or in China or in the Middle East or in Africa, you immediately understand, you realize that you have so much more in common with the Estonians and the Polish or the French and the Italians than with anybody else. And in the end, that's, one way to look at this with an optimistic view is that in the end, it's again geography itself, the one that we described in the beginning, that is going to, enable further integration if it happens. And that's because, I mentioned it, the geopolitical isolation that we find ourselves in, the fact that we are being squeezed between the two giants, the United States and China. That's also a geographic feature, and Russia, of course, and Turkey. The pressure that comes from aggressive, assertive middle powers, that's also a main geopolitical feature of our world today. So this will reinvigorate possibly our perception, the perception that we have for ourselves, for our continent, and for the common things that we share with each other, and possibly enable the emergence of a very distinct European interest that will also underline political integration. But I guess that we're very close to running out of time. But political integration and the search for unity, which is a parallel history, maybe we can make this into the next episode of The Shape of Europe.